Hark! It's an 87th Precinct podcast. This is the only podcast in the world dedicated to Ed McBain's seminal series of police procedural novels, which began in 1956 with Cop Hater and ended in 2005 with Fiddlers. There were 55 books in the series, and today's podcast looks at book number 28, Hail to the Chief. To review the book, I'm joined as usual by, it's two of the most fearsome gang leaders in Northern England. Mr. Stephen Royston, president of the Yorkshire Shin Kickers.
Hello.
And Mr. Morgan Brown, head honcho of the Cumbrian Biters. My name is Paul Abbott, and I remain unaffiliated with any paramilitary organisation since I left the Scouts. As usual, before we get going, here's our plea for assistance. You can drop us a financial contribution by buying us a digital coffee for the grand sum of $3 at ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Hark87podcast. But other than that, a rating, review or sharing of the podcast makes a big difference to us, helping us be able to reach a wider audience. And let's start off in celebratory fashion, because we've reached a sort of milestone. In fact, we've passed one. Oof. We are now past half the halfway point of the series.
Right, well.
This is book 28 of 55 books.
It feels like we've only just begun.
We've only just begun.
Well, that's an achievement, and under half.
Whoa,
that was good. That, and also in the second half of the series, you've also got like the Christmas book is counted as one of those. So that's a shorter one.
Yeah.
But then there's a couple of other things I could throw in there to balance that out. So I reckon we're just past halfway.
Maybe we should start going from the end of the books and then work back into the middle.
Oh.
Because that would make total sense, wouldn't it?
That would really help with the sort of continuity of character. Oh, I can't even imagine. No, let's not do that.
Only kidding.
Don't do that. Anyway, Hail to the Chief is the second book in 1973. The one before was Let's Hear It for the Deaf Man, which was our last podcast. And, I'll run down the publication history for this to start off with, because I sometimes forget, you see, to do that. And it is worth mentioning for fact collectors here, because this is the first book to be published by Random House. So he moves to a new publisher. And I think as you read through the history, if you ever look at the history of who published what with McBain, and this goes for Evan Hunter as well, he does start to chop and change from the 70s onwards quite often who's publishing what for him.
How come?
I think he got quite dissatisfied. He felt that they weren't always pushing his work enough. And so if he wasn't happy with that, he'd get out of the contract with them. Whether he was doing it on like a rolling basis of like saying, you can do the next 5 books of McBain and the next 5 Evan Hunters, and then we'll see. Or whether it was on a ongoing basis, or whether he sued them to get out of the contract, which he has been known to get litigious. Yeah. I don't know, but this is a start of a few Random House publications, or certainly Random House for publishing the main hardback editions, Any Road. So it comes out in Random House in 1973. Paperback in America comes out in 1975 in the Signet edition. UK, it stays the same. It's Hamish Hamilton, 1973 for the hardback, and Pan in 1975 for the paperback as well. In our bonus podcast, you'll be able to hear us talk a bit more about the covers of all of those sorts of things. So, new publisher. While we're on the subject of new things, we're in a new room for doing the podcast as well, and it's very warm, so we've had to open the window. Also, I live near a train line, so there might be all sorts of sounds going on in this thing, so enjoy the new ambience.
Indeed.
We'll see what it's like. Before we get stuck into some reviews from the time, can we have just a general chat about this book? As in, bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an odd one.
Bit different.
Yeah, well, as we know, he doesn't like us to settle in too much to what we expect from the series, does he?
No, he doesn't.
Every couple of books you do get a little surprise, and this is quite a surprise.
I suppose what I haven't done, or we haven't kept track of, is every time I've said, this is a bit different, or this is a bit weird, or this is unusual, I've not checked to see how often those books come, but it might be about every 2 or 3.
Yeah, it seems it, doesn't it?
I think, there are atypical entries in the series more often than than you tend to think when you're looking back over the series as a whole.
Yeah.
Because even if you have a story that seems a bit familiar, it might have been done in a totally... Because there's been gang stories before,
Yeah,
hasn't there,
absolutely.
some time ago.
In that respect, you feel like you should be on fairly familiar ground here, but it's a very different approach, obviously.
Is it the first time he's used the kind of the confession, as it were, starts in like the first chapter, and that kind of runs parallel with the story, albeit the confession only comes out bit by bit.
There are some stories where the confession element plays a bigger part, but it generally tends to come at the end, as in the investigation happens, then the person does the confession.
Yeah, you often get a little transcript towards the end, don't you? But
because in this, you find out who the guilty party is right from the outset, really, and it's how they're involved.
Yeah, and
it is still a bit unexplained.
Their interpretation of events as opposed to the narrator's depiction of events.
Yeah, so I think the point, the impression we're trying to get across here is it is, again, different from what you would classify as a standard McBain 87th Precinct story, but as we're also suggesting that's probably not as clear-cut as you think anyway. One thing I did discover with this book is that it was reviewed quite a lot at the time. I could find a few more reviews than I normally can for this one. Normally there's the New York Times, there's the Observer, and perhaps you might find another one somewhere. I wonder, because this was the first one out in Random House, if they made a real push on getting it reviewed and stuff, because that's what he would have been insisting on, I reckon.
Or maybe due to its topicality.
Yes, and that's something we'll come on to.
A bit of both, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I suspect he would have had people in the publicity department of Random House jumping to try and make sure he felt welcome and like he was being looked after.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I think, you're right, the topical nature of this book, which we haven't really gone into yet, but we will reveal to anyone who doesn't know before too long. So, I got stuff from the Washington Post in October of 1973. And what does it say?
Who's that guy Morgan likes right for?
Well, we'll get to that.
Is he coming up?
I'm not going to read through much of these directly from the thing, because they don't generally review the book so much as review the idea of the book.
Oh, right, okay. Well, maybe come back to them.
Yeah, well, maybe. But I'll say, like, the Washington Post is sort of saying, does it work? The answer is not that well. So Gene M. White in the Washington Post wasn't too keen. In the Times of London, it describes it as the cleverest 87th Precinct tale for some time.
Maybe, yeah.
The Observer, Crime Ration, that's one of the usual ones we see, from Maurice Richardson. This is McBain's shortest, loosest, and most horrific book so far. That's, again, I think that's pretty spot on.
Yeah.
New York Times, Books of the Times. So this isn't Newgate Calendar. We've not got to him yet. This was reviewed in the main book section as well, so not just the crime section. He wasn't too keen on it. He says, wait 6 months and there'll be a better 87th Precinct along. He invented the word precinct there. That's quite nice. And whereas I would normally give Newgate Calendar to Morgan to mock, like that's the sound of him, you don't really need to this time.
Oh, why does he like it?
Yeah, I think he likes it more because it's not like the normal ones.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Either that or Ed McBain threatened to break his kneecaps.
Yeah, which, well, you don't know. It's a bleak, curiously convincing character McBain presents, talking about the main guy in the book. You'd almost think he patterned him after a living model. Could the title of the book offer a clue? And I think that basically leads...
Still being a bit of a narc, isn't he?
Well...
You always suspect.
It's not much of a review. It is, like most of them, it is just saying, the book is about this, it has this character in, is it an allegory for what's going on? And actually the answer is, of course, yes.
Yes.
Bizarrely, I found a full-page advert from one of the newspapers for this book, and it was like saying, oh, there's a real twist at the end of this. Which there isn't.
No.
There's a sort of twist in, you might get the concept at the end of it, if you were reading it at the time. But it was being sold as like, what's the shock ending of this? It's like, well, actually, it's given away right at the start.
The significance of that character grows as the book goes on. It doesn't immediately hit you, I don't think. Even when you know kind of what the broad concept of the book is.
In outline, then, this idea of it being the bloodiest book so far.
Well, yeah.
Starts with a heck of a body count, doesn't it? One of the most gruesome scenes.
Yeah, I tell you what, the beginning, the first page or so is absolutely brilliant, I thought.
It's pretty hard hitting stuff.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
They found the bodies in an open ditch on the northernmost extreme of the 87th Precinct.
Yeah,
You've already got the word bodies in there, plural, so you know.
Yeah, it's just relentless amount of information, like, for the first few pages, really. Yeah, very good start, actually.
And it's a winter book as well, so it's a cold, frozen, wet, icy, horrible situation that Corella and Kling find themselves in, having had to go out and investigate these bodies.
I bet the weather plays a lesser part in this book than most, actually. Very, very backseat, I thought.
Yeah, it's just sort of... Yeah, it's just when the book's set
rather than part of the story.
Yeah, it's less of a character of the...
Because at the end, when it goes on about... When the narrator is going on about the snow, and you're like, oh, is it winter? Oh, of course it is, yeah, bodies are in the ice and all that.
So that's pretty dramatic. We've got 6 bodies in a ditch. Basically, someone's torn up the covering of some works that are going on, like a pipe laying or something like that, cable laying,
roadworks,
and has thrown a load of bodies in, nude, including that of a baby as one of them. So you're in for a treat right from the off with this story.
Yeah, and the killing doesn't really let up throughout, really.
No. But Monaghan and Monroe, the Homicide North cops, turn up.
Yeah, just what you need when you're already dealing with 6 bodies in a ditch.
Yeah. So Corella and Kling, who are... Well, Kling, who's going through almost like post-traumatic stress, isn't he? Because he's looking back to the bookshop where Claire Townsend was killed. It's suddenly loomed large in his mind. Yeah. Corella just finds it horrifying, and then Monaghan and Monroe turn up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is terrible," but look at the body of that one in the pervy sense. It's like,
delightful.
One thing that Monaghan does say is that he used to be based in the 8-3 in the 83rd Precinct.
Oh, yeah.
And we've yet to meet a very important character from the 83rd Precinct.
Oh, right, okay.
He might be cropping up before too long, such as in the next book.
Does he?
Oh, maybe. Who are we talking about?
Well, I know what you're talking about, but...
You know.
I know, but I'm surprised it's the next one.
I don't think I knew he popped up quite that early. Yeah.
Does then he disappear for quite a long time and then come back?
I don't think so. I think he's around and about for quite a lot of it.
Oh.
He, the mysterious he, that everyone who's read the books will know what we're talking about. But yeah, there's a great little bit that Monaghan and Monroe are sort of saying, yeah, the 8-3, that's one hell of a precinct. Oh yeah, that's the precinct where Ralphie Donatello got shot in the back with an African blowgun. It's like, well, yeah, it sounds interesting there.
Yeah, and he's going on about loads of grannies buried in a basement or something.
Oh,
isn't
he? He's trying to find a case to outdo the amount of bodies that they've been faced with. It's like,
and he was like, oh, that's definitely worse than this one. He was a nice guy, Ralphie. Yeah. Or whatever. Yes, ridiculous.
It does actually, just as this first section concludes, it contains one of my favourite sort of McBain type writing moments. He says, on the river, a tugboat's horn bleated briefly and then was silent. It sounded as though someone had hit the button by accident. I just love that. It's that weird thing of just that. You can imagine that sharp noise in the night, and you're thinking, why? I love it. This is the colour I like. This is what I like his writing. Then we get a couple of bits of forensics, descriptions and discussions about how you try and work out things like careers from what's on, people's hands, fingerprints, evidence under the nails and stuff like that. All of which, as usual, amounts to absolutely nothing. So no clues for them. Which I hadn't really until I think perhaps you'd mentioned it, Morgan, I'd not really twigged that a lot of the time the forensics produce absolutely nothing.
Do a lot of work for very, very little reward.
Yeah.
Well, I think, unless you got a match with somebody with a record.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, like, the tip-off comes in a telephone call, doesn't it, really?
Ultimately.
A stroke of luck.
But what the book does, before we actually go through the story in chronological terms, or rather the way he writes it, before he starts writing the chronological story, it keeps being interrupted by a statement being given by someone at the police station.
Yeah.
You have to get your head around the notion that this guy, who we don't know what his relation to the story is telling us all about what has happened before we see it happening in the book, which is an interesting thing. And there's no big pronouncements about when it changes from one voice to the other. really, other than the first one where it's said statement of one Randall M Nesbitt, made on the 14th day of January.
And unusually for the series, it's not sort of really kind of very clearly marked out like a police statement. It's not reproduced in the font to make it look like a police report or anything. So I think it's quite deliberately kind of blended in with the more regular narrative, isn't it?
Yeah, he's given himself a bit of a writing challenge to do it in this way, I think. But Randall M Nesbitt is the character who's referred to in all those reviews I was mentioning at the top.
Yeah.
RMN, Randall M Nesbitt. Who could he be standing for? I wonder.
What could the M stand for? Is it Millhouse?
Well,
we don't know.
Yeah, you never actually find out what his middle initial stands for in this book. Known to his followers as Randy, we get to know Randall M Nesbitt quite well through the course of this story, and eventually figure out why we're hearing this statement. Shall we just basically say what it is? This is an allegory for Nixon's...
Well, the year's 1973, isn't it?
So we're in late 1973. Nixon has been in the news somewhat. Although, looking at the actual times of what happened with politics and events surrounding politics, by mid-1973, he wasn't fully implicated in Watergate by that point.
When did he resign?
Well, tell me everything you know about Nixon, because I don't know anything about him.
He was a long-standing Republican politician who
ran against
Kennedy and lost in 60.
Yeah,
1960.
Won in quite a landslide in 68.
68, yeah. And
was re-elected in 72.
Re-elected in 72, yeah. In the run-up to the re-election, had bugged the headquarters of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
Snitching, trying to find what they're up to.
Kind of very much valued his reputation as a peacekeeper, but used some quite aggressive means to maintain peace as well, I think. Like, very close relationships with sort of defence people and Secret Service and what have you.
Yeah.
Some
now,
underhand dealings.
I can't remember whether he was responsible for... Because he ultimately did start the withdrawal from Vietnam, didn't he? But
Absolutely.
I think slightly before that, or was it Johnson who massively escalated the war?
Well, I think Nixon was in some way implicated in the notion of scuppering the Paris Treaty that could have brought it to a close or conclusion earlier, and him, or certainly people he was associated with, were rumoured to have helped to have tried to scotch the Paris Treaty, thus extending the war. There'll be people who know stuff about this who'll be screaming.
Absolutely, yeah, we did.
At their
but he was known. He was also known for being a bit of a paranoid weirdo, wasn't he?
He had an enemies list.
Quite an odd guy, who was, his paranoia destroyed him, really.
Yeah,
and
and I guess probably paired with maybe the declining years of J. Edgar Hoover in the FBI as well. That's a dangerous combination of people to have lurking in the shadows.
Yeah. There was Henry Kissinger as well. Who was,
absolutely.
Very, is the word hawkish, kind of. A man who was very confident in his own opinion of things, really. So that is our...
He's
Nesbitt man
is the parallel for is for Nixon, basically.
And obviously you take him at face value to start with, but then you start to wonder how reliable a witness he is to what's transpiring in the book, and it gets more and more just blatantly obvious as the as the book goes on.
He's deluded.
That's absolutely the word, isn't it? The sheer total all-encompassing delusion that he's wrapped up in. He can't possibly see himself as anything other than this sort of great leader who's keeping the peace for everyone and who's doing what's right for the community.
But the fact that the Nixon and this Nesbitt are totally interchangeable as well. There's entire paragraphs later in the book where it could be just totally describing Nixon.
Pretty much, yeah.
And that's exactly what it's doing, really. But it starts off a little bit more subtly, I think.
Yes, it definitely ramps up the parallel, doesn't it, as we go along.
Yeah.
By the end, he might as well just be going, I am not a crook.
Yeah. Evan Hunter, Ed McBain, was very... Well, I don't say very. He was a liberal, basically.
Yes.
And he was liberal, he was anti-war, and what I did find is I had a look at sort of using Vietnam particularly as a good way to find out opinions, because obviously that influenced a lot of writing and stuff. So Evan Hunter wrote 2 books that were more or less about Vietnam. One was called Sons, that was in 1969, which is a sort of generational tale of families in different wars and sort of seeing different political events. But Vietnam figures large in that. And also in 1971, and I've mentioned this before, there was the book Nobody Knew They Were There, which is a sort of semi-fantastical, slightly in the future tale of getting someone to bomb a train with the president on it. So that's another sort of anti-war story as well. But I also found a newspaper article from the wonderfully named newspaper Patent Trader.
Excellent.
Which is, I don't know if patent is a place or what, but it was a local newspaper in Westchester County where McBain lived once he moved out of the city. This is from 29th of May 1971, and it's all the articles basically all about how the title is "He wants to help end the war," and the idea being his sons were more or less of the age where they could be sent off to fight by that point. In fact, they definitely were, and he was keen that they wouldn't. And so this newspaper article discusses this anti-war theme in his books, and then says, quote, "Mr. Hunter plans to move on from the war theme now because it feels it has occupied enough of his writing time." Well, here we are 2 years later, and he's still ostensibly writing about war, albeit couched in the idea of a gang war.
Yeah, I imagine probably living in the States at that time, it was probably very difficult to escape that kind of theme and to get that out of your mind and to avoid your art kind of reflecting it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. The story moves on. We have these parallel tales. We have the confession. Then we have the investigation popping in and out of that as well. And then we have Maya Maya's side story as well, which is brilliant. It's a Corella and Kling case for the most part, isn't it?
It is.
It is, yeah.
And Maya gets sent off, or he didn't get sent off, he gets rung up by someone who wants to talk to a policeman about whether they think TV is affecting the violence in the streets and things like that. It's a freelance writer who hasn't actually got a market for this, just wants to do this thing. And Maya's like, well, I'll have to talk to the lieutenant. And the lieutenant says, yeah, go on, do it then. He's like, yeah, but I've got to go and talk to a load of girls about how not to get raped. So Maya's having a brilliant time of it. He has to go and give a speech, which he's probably not very happy about self-defense against sexual assault. And he has to talk to this person whose name is what?
Montgomery somebody.
Montgomery Pierce Hoyt. Maya doesn't believe anyone's called Montgomery Pierce Hoyt, but it's probably because he's called Maya and is a bit sensitive about those sorts of things. That's actually when he's doing the talk to the girls' college about how not to get raped or what happens if someone tries to rape you. That's also intercut with another bit of storytelling as well. Yeah, basically he's got to... he starts giving his speech, and it keeps cutting backwards and forwards between the cops finding the place where one of the characters who's been killed was held captive. So a girl who has been taken away and beaten, basically, and ultimately killed. And there's not even gaps between the paragraphs. You have one paragraph of Maya doing his talk, and the next paragraph is a description of them finding this house where this girl has been held. It's very much a sort of TV cutaway, sort of two-stream storytelling type of thing, which is very interesting. So there's lots of bits of this book where it's one thing contrasting against another.
It is.
So yeah, Maya gets that side job to do, and there's barely any other cops in this at all.
There's the chap from the other precinct, isn't there?
Yeah,
Who's
no other cops from the 8-7.
Yeah, that's right.
Charles Braun. That's how Braun.
There's no T in it though. Is the Braun?
Yeah. So the guy from the 101st.
Who's like a bit of a gang specialist, isn't he?
Yeah.
Got his big file.
His big file. Yeah, there's a few patrolmen from the 101st Precinct who get to witness the most horrifying aspect of the book, which we've not got to yet. So ultimately, the story is gang warfare, isn't it?
Yes.
It is, yeah. How old are these people? Does he ever tell you that?
I think one of them, so Johnny, who's one of the gang members, is only 17 or something like that.
Oh, right.
And the girl who gets pregnant, Midge, is 15.
Yeah.
So I think they're all supposed to be late teens.
Late teens, yeah.
Essentially, but they're organised gangs.
Yeah, with serious sort of weapons. This is not sort of kids waving knives at each other. They've got serious firearms, haven't they?
Yeah, they even talk about the fact that someone was in a gang back in the 50s or something, and how unsophisticated it was when they were attacking each other with car aerials and zip guns.
Yeah.
And he's like...
We've got 34 grenades or something, he says at one point, doesn't he?
So I guess revisiting the kind of gang issue from earlier novels, you can really see kind of how these things have escalated.
Yeah. Ramped up somewhat. Even since, you remember we did the Young Savages film, and that was all about gangs. We're well more advanced than that.
So where's... Because it's set in the part of Riverhead. What's that the analogy of?
Riverhead's the Bronx, isn't it?
Well, that's where all the rioting was in the... Wasn't that like in the 70s, I think? Or around that time? That would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because that's where Corella lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
Because he goes on about, that's the only bit that's not deteriorated like the rest of it.
But essentially it's three gangs, but Randall M Nesbitt's idea is he's going to bring peace, and he's going to do it by killing everyone.
Yep.
He's
Violent pacification.
The underlying concept being there's only one piece worth having, and that's the piece that he's dreamt up.
Yes.
And anybody else's type of peace is not peace in his head.
It's not going to be peaceful if people disagree with him, so he'd better kill everyone who does disagree with him, and then everyone will be happy.
Yeah.
And he's so moral, and that's said in speech marks. You know, he hates anything to do with sex. He doesn't like people to swear. He doesn't like anyone to do drugs. Nixon had a big thing about the marijuana lobbying stuff as well.
Absolutely hilariously trying to enlist Elvis to report other people for using drugs when he was absolutely off his face on tranquilizers the entire time, I'd imagine.
Yes. Well, there's that famous photo, isn't there, of big fat Elvis shaking hands when he's made an honorary FBI agent or something like that, or he wanted to be.
Yeah.
Weird times. But yeah, so Randall Nesbitt's all about if he wants that version of things, but he also wants everyone to be white. He doesn't want them, so he's facing off against a Puerto Rican gang called the Death's Heads.
Yep.
Cool name for a gang.
Yeah, cool name. They've got the white Swedish army coats, which I'm kind of fascinated by too. Cause I think we should try and look up some images of those, because I want to know what those look like.
Oh, we'll get Mr. Royston on that. So a white Swedish army coat
with a gargoyle drawn on the back.
Yeah, and the password of something along the lines of "the Notre is our dame."
Something like that, yeah.
There's a quite interesting thing. Twice in this book, Kling is thinking constantly about something he's heard or misheard, and it's just occurring to him a day later or hours later.
Yeah.
It happens twice in this book.
Yeah, to no consequence whatsoever. It's just a thing that happens.
I figured it out, yeah. And the other main gang, the black gang, is the Scarlet Avengers. Oh.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Oh, nice hood.
I think if I was in a gang, I could definitely go for one of those.
Especially in the weather in this book.
True. Although it'd be nasty if you were eating any kind of messy food. Spillages. Ooh, never come out.
Not good for spillages.
But we don't actually find out the name of Nesbitt's gang for ages in this as well, which I think is another sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
Because ultimately it comes out as his gang's the Yankee Rebels, which is about as waspish a sort of name as you can possibly get. And their logo on the back is the
Confederate flag,
So it's basically a three-way tie it's a three-way battle between these.
Yeah, because he spends a lot of time banging on about what a brilliant strategic mind he's got, and yet he's kind of outwitted at every stage, and it's like, well, how was I supposed to know they were? It's then when blank screwed it up, and I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for so and so. So he's just like, Yeah.
Well, one of the major Nixon parallels in this is to do with a girl in the gang. So a girl in the gang gets pregnant because he's so moral, he won't allow her as an auxiliary member of the gang to have an abortion.
Yep.
Forces her to give, or tells her to stay a member of the gang. She has to give up her child, which she does. She's only 15. This upsets her somewhat, and then when she hears that a baby's been killed, she starts talking about it in the sense that she rings up the 87th Precinct. She's on the phone to the cops when someone yanks the phone cable out of the wall. Which seems like very dramatic license until you actually look into some of the people involved in Nixon's world, such as Martha Mitchell. So I don't know if you know anything about Martha Mitchell at all.
It rings a bell.
Well, John Mitchell was the Attorney General under Nixon.
Yeah, John Mitchell, yeah.
His wife was Martha Mitchell.
Okay.
So in the days immediately after the Watergate break-in in 1972, John Mitchell enlisted a guy from the former FBI agent called Steve King to stop her learning any more about the break-in or contacting reporters, because she had, according to them, a big mouth, basically. She would talk to anyone. They called her the mouth from the south and all that sort of stuff. Despite these efforts, Martha learned that one of her friends, her daughter's bodyguard, and the driver, James W. McCord Jr., were among those arrested. She began to explore the events in order to help him. While she was on a phone call with a press reporter, Helen Thomas, about the Watergate break-in, Steve King pulled the phone cord from the wall. On other occasions, Mrs. Mitchell was held against her will in a hotel room, forcefully sedated, and had a physical struggle with men that left her needing hospitalisation, doctor's treatment. So
Jeez.
What happens in this book is someone talking to someone where the phone cable is pulled out of the wall. Someone is taken off to a remote location to keep them quiet and out of the way. Someone has a struggle with men, but sadly, rather than just needing stitches, the character in the book is killed.
Yeah.
So I didn't realise until I found out about Martha Mitchell, and I must thank some of our friends on Twitter for sort of alerting me to the parallel of that.
Wow.
Quite how parallel the parallel was.
Oh, that's fascinating, actually, yeah.
So I'm sure you could probably, if you were so minded, go through the book and probably tie in lots of
Big Anthony's probably somebody, isn't he?
So this character, Steve King, from this ex-FBI guy who was the security agent for the president's campaign, he must be the Bullet or Big Anthony or Jojo, one of these characters in the book.
Yeah.
But he's all right because he's now Trump's ambassador to the Czech Republic. So, the funny thing about Watergate is it sort of, certainly for the big names involved, it just sort of went.
Oh, yeah.
It was done.
Well, Nixon was given a full pardon by Gerald Ford, wasn't he? Straight after he resigned, basically.
Yeah. And then...
And never once accepted that he'd actually done anything wrong, I don't think.
Yeah. Which actually...
Well, I think that famous interview with David Frost was, I think, was that the only time he ever kind of showed any remorse about it?
And it was more like...
Feeling sorry for himself.
Yeah, and he felt bad for the fact that it had a negative effect on the country, but he didn't really actually think he'd done anything morally wrong at all, which is just ludicrous, really.
And it took David Frost ages to actually get him to that position where he'd talk about it in that sense. Because he was very media-minded, as the character in the book is when he's talking to the police. He's like, I know all about the image. I want to present this sort of image.
Well, I was just looking before. Nixon didn't resign till August 1974.
Exactly. So that's after this. Yeah.
A long time. So this must have just been using what was in the public domain at the time to just... Evan Hunter thinking, right, I'm going to get the shoe in as well here. Expressing his outrage.
Definitely. It was that was very much the mood at the time. Phil Oakes had just released Here's to the State of Richard Nixon, which is one of the great kickings delivered in song.
All right, well,
magnificent, strongly recommended.
We'll have to see if we can link to that on the Twitter feed. So yeah, McBain must have been writing this before anything official happened to Nixon, because like Nixon's "I am not a crook" statement doesn't happen until November of 1973, which is after this book's come out.
I think all the Bernstein and Woodward stuff, that was started in 70.
Yeah, that had happened.
Because I remember in the movie, they watched the inauguration, which would have been inauguration, one of those.
January 72.
73.
73, whatever it was.
That would have been January 73, wouldn't it? So, yeah.
Well, the Watergate trial begins in 73.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it would have been public knowledge in 1972.
Yeah.
Along,
through the newspapers before it became official through the courts, the actual accusations were made. Because it was a point where they wanted to get the tapes from the Oval Office, weren't they?
Yes. But
and Nixon was basically like, I've taped everything I've said, and I'm a shitbag.
Yep.
Perhaps I won't give you the tapes.
Well, one of the first times in here it becomes really obvious is when they go on about bugging the other gang's headquarters.
How easy it is
it is to, you can just mail order a bug.
Yeah,
and send some kids in so that if they were arrested, nobody'd bat an eyelid kind of thing. I thought that was very funny.
But yeah, he definitely hung on until it was absolutely inevitable that he was definitely going to be impeached, didn't he?
Yeah, and he did during that time. He got people to resign and sacked them left, right and centre as well to try and cover up or distance himself.
As we continue to see, it's totally possible for someone to be a massive, blatant criminal and still hang on to power for a very long time.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, really?
It looks like most of the stuff was brewing, became pretty obvious July 1973. So he must have rattled this book out in
a fit of rage.
Yeah.
Well,
so when was the publication date?
It'd have been late September, October.
Yeah,
73.
so he must have just rattled this out in like the late summer.
Which might explain why there was 2 books in 1973 where there isn't normally.
Yeah.
He doesn't normally do 2 books a year at this point.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, we kind of feel like Let's See If the Deaf Man was written as a fairly expediently anyway, and then this, I think, it feels angry, doesn't it? I feel like he's definitely it's hammering away at the typewriter.
It's a dead straightforward story, isn't it? Really, in terms of what actually happens.
And it's a short book as well.
It's just the cleverness is in how it's presented, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the bodies keep racking up through this, you end up you've got the 6 bodies at the start, and there's a certain investigation in identifying who those people are, including the one white guy who seems to be on his own when the others are clearly a Puerto Rican couple, a black couple, child, and then there's this white guy. Eventually, his mad girlfriend turns up from California and tries to sleep with Corella. In some Fleabag hotel.
Indeed. Yeah, he has some difficulty dissuading her from her determination to sleep with him, doesn't he?
Yeah, but I think she just wants someone to get her out of the crap hotel, ultimately. Yeah. She sort of stands out as like this sort of tanned Californian beauty who's turned up and is in one of these really crap hotels in Islay in the depths of winter. But aside from that happens, then we have the girl who's killed, Midge. We have a boyfriend who doesn't want to take part in a later gang fight, so he's killed to keep him out of the way as well. We've got packs of wild dogs roaming around Riverhead that the police have to keep going after, which is just like a weird aside. I don't know if any of our listeners lived in New York in the early 70s and were aware of any plagues of wild dogs, but it wouldn't surprise me to know that might happen.
Yeah, from what people tell you about New York at that point in the 70s, I think there was definitely some very bleak areas, weren't there?
Yeah, it's entirely plausible. And then we get to, ultimately, the pitched battle at the end, which starts with, as I mentioned before, the absolute horror of gang warfare with like, well, how should we start this raid on the place where we know they've captured a couple of our men? How should we get in there? Oh, I know, we'll throw 2 hand grenades into this shop.
Into a sweet shop.
Yeah. Because there wouldn't be anyone innocent in a sweet shop.
No, God forbid.
And, it's horrible. It's
I think it's made more horrible by the fact that when you get Mr. Nesbitt talking about it, he's got a very sort of bland kind of attitude towards all these, quite a politician's manner about all these horrific acts that he's sanctioned as well.
Yeah, and he keeps insisting he hasn't got any blood on his hands, which he literally doesn't, but that's...
Yeah. Because at the very end, there's summing up when the other guy's shot, he like claims not to have shot him as well, which just seems totally implausible in that why would he be the only person that's unarmed in his gang?
He's
it's just
delusional,
total outright lie. Yeah, it's not just spinning it. It's like beyond spin, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of that attack on the candy store, I wouldn't want to give anything away. Safe to say, I think it probably is one of the most horrific scenes of violence in the 7th Precinct.
Yeah, it is.
And those poor officers from the 101st, those patrolmen from the 101st Precinct who arrive at the scene.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt a bit like that just reading it, so having to actually be there.
It's not nice.
It's really, really not.
But yeah, again, Randall Nesbitt thinks he's brilliant, but even his idea of attacking these two gangs at the same time goes wrong. Because he ends up in a pincer movement of two other gangs. He's just totally out. Does some of his like gang defect as well? I couldn't really understand.
There was some question, some suggestion that the two who've been kidnapped had actually defected from the other gang. Do you think, is that a reference to anyone in the Nixon cabinet possibly going over to communist Russia? Members of the Yankee rebels going over to the Scarlet Avengers?
I don't know.
It feels like it should be.
Yeah, I'm sure a better Nixon Watergate scholar than I could tie that together very easily.
There doesn't seem to be anything accidental
I
in
feel
any
like
of
that's
these
a
characters.
very specific reference to something.
I mean, you
isn't
could
it?
run down all these Chingo equals, Henry
definitely.
Kissinger. There'll just be a
Oh yeah, I'm sure, and I'm sure at some point while I'm doing my research for the book that I'm writing about the 87th Precinct, I'm going to have to do that for this one, which is going to make it quite an entry in the book.
That'll be fun.
But yeah, I'm sure it will be when I finally get there. 30,000 words, and I haven't even started on the stories yet.
Right. There'll be plenty of time for that.
I hope there's some publishers listening. But yeah, there we go. Safe to say, it ends with Nesbitt getting captured. Hence his confession, which actually comes at the start of the book, so you turn the whole thing on its head again. Corella and Klinger left with it, just going, he doesn't know what he's done. He just does not know. He will not confess to it. And it's clearly that's what people were seeing with Nixon was he's clearly done all this stuff that's come out in the papers. It's clearly linked to him, because how would the president not know about funds being used from the campaign for re-election of the president, or creep, I think, as people call it.
Yeah.
How could he not know that this was happening, blah, 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 especially once they start to tie the bits together, like the Bernstein and Woodward stuff. That film's very good, isn't it? Is that, which one's it called? All the President's Men?
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
It's very
really
good,
want to.
but it's very mumbly.
Mm.
You basically got Dustin Hoffman talking down. Everyone's talking like that.
No, it's good. Yeah, I've seen it.
But it is fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen it a few times. Where's the bit? There was a bit in this I'd remembered. It's like a bit where it is just basically total description of Nixon.
Oh, it's when they first meet him, as in what, the physical description?
No, not the physical description. It's near the end when he a short chopping wave. I bet Nixon used to do that.
Yeah.
Just bear with me.
I did find myself towards the end starting to hear his voice in my head in the Richard Nixon voice from Futurama.
Yes, I kept thinking about... Well, that's the thing with Nixon, isn't it? This is part of the problem, is that he's been rehabilitated through becoming almost a comical figure very quickly. After the events of Watergate, and obviously it was a massive scandal, but then the Frost-Nixon stuff, which obviously set the stamp on him as this, slightly tragic figure in some ways, although clearly he wasn't. The opinion polls were dead set against him. Well, it wasn't much longer after that before he became sort of like a bit rehabilitated. People would be going, "Oh, Nixon, he opened trade with China and he ended the Vietnam War."
Yeah.
And then he becomes a bit of a figure of fun on things like Futurama and stuff like that.
It's bizarre and alarming, really.
It's almost like we never bloody learn.
I know. But yeah, it's almost exactly like that, yeah. Of course, I think I first learned about Nixon at all from the song Dickie's Such an Asshole by...
it's in the letter, isn't it?
Did anyone else struggle with the handwriting?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So, Steve-O, what's this description of someone as Nixon. Let's just say that. So you found something that's in the letter. So in the the reproduction in this book is not of any form or procedure thing. It's of someone's handwritten letters.
Yeah, it's
if
from
you
the
can figure out what it says.
Yeah, it's from the guy from. Is he from LA? Is he?
Yeah,
the guy who's trying to like help. Who is one of the bodies in the ditch, and he's written to his girlfriend who's come over. In writing suspiciously like writing we've seen in other books as well, isn't it? Strange book, slightly worse anyway. But yeah, it's got a very good description of Randall Nesbitt. He says, the real problem may prove to be the president of the Yankee rebels, who from all...
Portoles has told me. Is an
egotistical, brutal, unforgiving, humorless, puritanical, and basically rather stupid person who has detached himself into believing that he is the only one in the neighbourhood who knows the true and righteous path, and told anyone who disagreed with him is crazy or
is either crazy.
Or that
or
is
intent on thwarting
his grandiose and thoroughly self-serving schemes. His name is Richard Nixon, and I will try to talk to him. You know, it's just when I read that bit, it's just kind of
that is McBain letting loose. I think on it.
Definitely. Should also say the handwriting is dreadful. So if you're stumbling over any words there,
I'm not the greatest reader, but it's quite. It took a few reading it for the first time.
I could only make out about every third word when I was reading this, but I got the gist.
Yeah, basically.
So I thought that was quite fun. Well, I did laugh when I read that bit.
Yeah.
Which I thought summed it up quite nicely.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So I will say there is a couple of good 87th Precinct moments in this, but it is not one that scores very highly, I don't think, on the bingo card. But there is one good chapter, start chapter 4, where it's lots about the history of the city. So it actually explains the derivation of Riverhead.
Yeah,
as
well. There's a mayor bit in as well. It's not lacking bingo, but
no,
medium.
There are a few.
Yeah.
And
there is at least one character in it who has got green eyes and red hair and must come from an Irish background, who's a woman, which I think is probably the most common thing in the books, more than anything else. There's always a female character who's got, I was going to say red eyes and green hair then. Green eyes and red hair and comes from an Irish background.
Grotbags. I remember.
Grotbags.
I remember
Bless.
popping up.
Talk about British ephemera.
Yep, there we go.
We normally keep those for the...
There's somebody at the door.
There's somebody at the door. Oh dear, oh dear. Right, well, we're going to have to start summing this one up then, and it's a bit of an interesting one. I will just give you some comments from some of our friends online who I asked what their opinion were. So, Bill Slocum, he suggests that he clearly had some things to say about the direction of the country, Vietnam and Nixon, so I guess he got that out of his system a bit. Too bad there wasn't Twitter in 1973. I think McBain would have been insanely brilliant on Twitter.
I'm sure he would.
He would probably have taken no guff as well.
Quite.
In fact, it probably would have been a bad thing for him to have Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
Who else have we got? So, Hank Wellman, and it was Hank who alerted me to the Martha Mitchell parallel. It says, knowing that the novel was intended as a fuck you to Nixon makes it more interesting in terms of the little allegories. But I still tend to think of it as a misfire, bottom rung 87th Precinct novel. Oof. Our friend Matthew Sullivan says, I think I like Hail to the Chief because of the Nixon allegory rather than in spite of it, which I think is the issue with some people have with this. The Nixon is a sick crook trope had legs long before Watergate broke, especially in liberal New York circles. McBain proves himself a great hater here. Although I imagine Hail to the Chief certainly dated very quickly. I think that, again, that's possibly its issue, because a lot of people did mention, I didn't really realise. Yeah, I think it's probably all of us didn't necessarily grab the allegory first time round.
Well, the first time.
Well, that was your first read,
This
wasn't
was
it?
my first time round, so...
I'd alerted you.
Yes.
Steve-O was...
when I first read it, I was just marching through them in order, and I would have had no concept of... kind of exactly when it was written. I can't remember thinking I knew. If I'd forgotten or I didn't know. So, but reading it a second time, it's reasonably obvious.
Yeah, once you're looking for it.
Yeah.
And our friend Andrew said, I really liked Hail to the Chief style-wise, especially the bouncing back and forth between the case and the interrogation. For me, the unique narrative, coupled with the brutal events in the novel, makes it one of the more memorable entries. So we've got a bit of a split on that, really, there. Yeah. Some folks liking it, some folks not. So we will round up the scores in a minute. I will give Steve-O Kenneth's output of recent books. Because, we can't grade it without checking in it with Kenneth, our computer who scores our scores.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Hank and the other chap there. I think its success is the analogy, isn't it? And the knowing what it's about, I think. And it's interesting and good for that. And the jumping around I quite enjoyed as well. But I think if you take that out of it, if you didn't know that, then maybe it starts to fall down a little bit. I don't know.
Well, do you want to give a score then, Steve?
I think I would be tempted to go about 75 police shields.
Okay.
It's not perfect, but it's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting and, yeah.
Okay, interesting and yeah. I'll go with that one. Morgan, then.
Well, yeah, going into it, knowing that it was this allegory which seemed like a bit of an oddity within the series, I was fully prepared to not particularly like this, but I actually really enjoyed it. I know maybe the allegory isn't the most subtle thing, but I don't think it needs to be. I kind of like the rage of it. I don't know if it's just because I kind of pretty much every day wake up, look at the news and feel the same way at the moment, and it just kind of taps into that mood.
But it's exhausting, isn't it?
If you read it and you didn't know the analogy and then somebody told you about it, you'd be like, oh, bloody hell, I would have enjoyed that book so much more had I known it and been able to scrutinise.
But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I like the structure as well. I think that actually works really well. As you say, I think quite filmic sometimes in the kind of snap cuts and things. I thought that was great. Also, what we didn't mention, a little bit of happiness for Bert Kling there, I think, too. Yeah. Nice. Sure, it's all plain sailing from here on out. Great stuff. Happy days, sailing to the sunset.
Yeah. That's a good point. There's very little, actually, of the cops in their various environments, really. Except that Kling and Carell are in a car together and Kling's thinking about asking Augusta to marry him. He's only known her 9 months, I think, at this point. But he does.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes on.
All plain sailing, I guarantee you. One little happy bit amidst a really bleak kind of vision. I also quite like the little bit at the end where they slightly break the fourth wall.
Oh yeah, in some ways it's a bit clunky, isn't it? It is a bit like they all turn to camera and go,
yeah,
yo.
Pretty much. Well, I quite like that. Yeah, I think it's actually got quite a lot to recommend it for me anyway. Not necessarily the best on kind of the terms of what you really look for in the series, but I thought it was great. 78 police shields?
78 police shields. Okay. And I will sum it up in saying this. The first time I read this, I had no idea. Like Steve, I had no idea about the Nixon thing whatsoever. Again, it was when I was getting them just as and when and reading them. And having perhaps read something like Sadie when she died, I think I probably got that at the same time I got this. Mm. And then reading this, I was never a big fan of the gang stories, and this is like the ultimate one in the series. But now, so after that reading, I would have scored it probably quite low, probably like down 40, 50 even.
Oof.
Reading it now and being able to see the parallels and, like you say, feel the anger coming through and understanding that, I'm minded to give it more marks, although I'm still minded to keep it in the 60s rather than the 70s. So I'm going to give it 65 police shields.
Dragging the scores down.
I know. Which gives us a score of 72 police shields.
That's fairly respectable, I think. Yeah.
God, less than Let's Hear It for the Deaf Man.
Yeah, controversial, I think. But, well, it takes all sorts.
we still haven't toppled King's Ransom from the top, have we? Or
a couple of things have come close, but
and we've not plummeted as far as 80 Million Eyes.
King's Ransom. He who hesitates. No, Doll. Is it?
Yeah, Doll's one of the high-rated ones. Sadie is one of the high-rated ones.
Sadie when she died at the top, and Fuzz are the top four. I can't remember what happens in Fuzz.
The deaf man turns up.
Oh, right, yeah.
And yeah,
Again,
Gorilla
for the
gets set on
second time.
fire.
I can only remember the ones that have totally literal...
The one where this happens.
Yeah, 80 million eyes. So you can always remember that.
Yeah, because it's to do with man getting attacked by 80 million eyes.
Exactly, yeah.
It's a horrifying.
King's
scene.
Ransom, remember that? It's the one it bulls a ransom.
Yeah.
And a king
Well,
of sorts.
I don't think there's necessarily anything bad about not being able to remember them because you can go and read them again.
This is very true.
But we'll conclude there. We'll do our bonus episode where we look at the book covers and some other information, some fantasy casting for the 87th Precinct, and more beside. But until the next time when we return to read the book Bread, where a man gets attacked by some bread, I'm going to say goodbye, as are these gentlemen. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Fairly well.